ages and subject matter. In addition to having over 40 authors, and some historians think this is a conservative estimate, the books of both Testaments were created in different languages, initially passed down through generations as a series of oral tales. Most books of the Old Testament were written down in Hebrew, with some sections first recorded in Aramaic. In contrast, the New Testament was written almost entirely in Greek, although it contains some Aramaic and Latin, which was brought to the region by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. In broad terms, the action described in the books of the Bible presents a history of mankind, from the earth's creation as recorded in Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, in a prophetic vision of the world in the final book of the New Testament known as Revelation. It is a mixture of history, prophecy and folklore, and contains tales that may have circulated by word of mouth for many centuries before being set down in writing. Dating biblical tales is therefore a twofold process: dating the text the tale is written in, and looking for evidence within the tale that links it to other known historical facts. For example, the oldest existing fragments of the Hebrew Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls, are understood mainly to date from between 150 BC and 70 AD. However, scholars believe that some of the tales could date to 1200 BC. Earliest Bible tales. Assessing the age of the earliest biblical texts is extremely difficult. The best scholars can do is try to date individual stories and passages, and one way of doing this is by analysing any artefacts found alongside the text fragments. Another key to a text's age are the historical references within the text itself. For example, Deuteronomy 26:5 begins with the phrase, "My father was a wandering Aramaean," which suggests that this section must be very old indeed, given the fact that in more recent Jewish history, the Aramaeans were sworn enemies of the Jews. Another way of assessing the age of a text is to compare its grammar and vocabulary with other ancient, non-biblical sources. A good example of this can be seen in the victory song of Deborah, that's Judges 5:2-31. Based on its style and language, scholars believe this could have been written as early as the 12th century BC, and there's a stained glass image there of Saint Deborah. So this illustration on the right hand side is the Bible of Bourseau d'Est, handwritten on vellum, which is animal skin, between 1455 and 1461. This sumptuous Vulgate Bible was commissioned by Bourseau d'Est, a 15th century Italian duke. The book's 1,000 illuminations were painted by 5 artists, including Taddeo Cavelli and Franco del Rusi. Luke's Gospels in the 70s AD, with John's significantly later. Others argue for Mark and Luke in the early 60s, Matthew shortly after, and John in the 80s. A further complication is the fact that none of the book's authors are attributed within their respective texts, although John describes himself as the beloved disciple, 13:1. However, the early church accepted that two of the Gospel's authors were friends of Jesus, Matthew, the tax collector, and John, although whether this was John the Apostle or another John is unclear. The other two evangelists were apostolic men who did not know Jesus, Mark, a friend of Peter, and Luke, a friend of Paul. Luke was also the author of the Acts of the Apostles. The two books, Luke and Acts, were possibly intended as 2 volumes of a single work. So this lovely illustration in the middle of the 2 pages is a page from the Book of Kells, circa 800, and it's from the Gospel of Matthew. So here Luke is a winged ox, a symbol of duty, sacrifice, and strength. Here an eagle, a bird once believed to be capable of staring into the sun, represents John. On the right hand side at the top is Mark. The writing is very tiny. His symbol is a winged lion, thought to represent courage, and here on the left Matthew is portrayed knows exactly how many copies have been printed, sold, or distributed. The Bible is generally considered to be the best-selling book of all time. Until the Reformation, however, it was the preserve of an educated elite. For centuries, the Bible was transcribed by hand. In 382 AD, for example, Eusebius Hieronymus, usually known as Saint Jerome, was commissioned by Pope Damasus to produce a Latin version of the Bible from various translations. Jerome's revised Latin Gospels appeared around 383, followed by Latin translations of parts of the Greek Septuagint version of the Old Testament, including the Psalms and the Book of Job. Eventually, dissatisfied with his efforts, Jerome translated the entire Old Testament from the original Hebrew, completing the project about 405. This became the official version of the Western Church and was known as the Vulgate. The Versio Vulgata, or Common Version, it became the standard translation used by Western Christianity for the next 1,000 years. As the Eastern Byzantine Empire weakened in the 13th century, scholars moved west, taking with them ancient manuscripts that included texts of the Greek and Hebrew Bible. Any translations that were made from these, however, remained in the official Latin Vulgate, sanctioned by the Church. So, this Bible in the middle is the Gutenberg Bible. It's the earliest known book printed on Johannes Gutenberg's mechanical, movable type printing press. It's also known as the 42-line Bible due to the fact that most pages were set out in 42 lines of type. From the mid-1370s, John Wycliffe, a lay preacher and Doctor of Divinity at Oxford University, England, began to attack what he saw as the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. He also believed that the Bible should be accessible to the common man in the language of the people, as opposed to Latin Vulgate, the language of scholarship. To that end, Wycliffe and his followers created the first complete translation of the Bible into English. However, Wycliffe's views were considered has also moved from standard book form into other media, including online, e-book and audio versions. Altogether, it is estimated that some 50 Bibles are now sold every minute. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction, and now I'm going to start with chapter 2, the Old Testament. The Old Testament lands. We have a map here, a couple of maps. The drama of the Old Testament takes place in a region known as the Fertile Crescent. This is an arc of relatively well-watered land stretching from Egypt in the south, northwards through Canaan and Phoenicia, and eastwards through Mesopotamia. So, here is Mesopotamia and Asia Minor. This island is Crete. Here is Rhodes and Cyprus. Syria, Assyria, Midian, Canaan, here, Egypt, Persia, Babylonia, the Arabian Desert, and the Mediterranean Sea. At the top, the Black Sea, and here is the Caspian Sea. And the Red Sea. The Fertile Crescent is often called the cradle of civilization, for it was here at around 9000 BC that the first Neolithic farming settlements were established. As agriculture flourished, so did towns and cities, and trade routes became vital arteries connecting communities. One such artery passed through Canaan, a land that stood at the crossroads between Asia, Africa and Europe. Due to its economic and strategic importance, this area was fought over by numerous powers during the Old Testament period, the most dominant being Egypt, Assyria and Babylon. In the Bible, this was the promised land awarded by God to Abraham and his descendants. God revealed his intentions for the Israelites in the form of the law after they had fled famine in Canaan, endured slavery in Egypt, and were being led back to Canaan by Moses, the prophet to whom the law was given when he received the Ten Commandments. After the rule of David and Solomon, the land of Canaan was divided into two, the northern kingdom called Israel and the southern kingdom called Judah. Israel eventually fell to the Assyrians in 722 BC and Judah to the Babylonians in circa 587 BC. By the end of the Old Testament period, the Israelites were in disarray. Though the Temple of Jerusalem was rebuilt by 516 BC, many questioned their covenant with God. The New Testament would see its affirmation. rose over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now this wonderful painting at the top is the creation of Adam. It's a panel painted in circa 1510 from Michelangelo's fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Depicts man made in God's likeness. Adam reaches out to God, who leans towards him. Their outstretched fingers suggest vital energy passing into the created. The Bible begins with the book of Genesis, the name which derives from both Greek and Hebrew, meaning origin or in the beginning, setting the stage on which the story of God and his people will be played out. The great questions of life are introduced, the origin of creation, of humanity and of sin, as well as God's desire to put things right once the perfect world was spoiled. The story opens not with human beings, but with God. His existence is taken for granted. He brings all creation into being by merely speaking a command. This creation or coming into being through the divine word is described as not a chance affair, but an orderly process that climaxes in the creation of human beings. Humans differ from animals in one key aspect. They are made following the likeness of God, who breathed his own life into them. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them, and that's from Genesis 1:27. The fall. According to the story told in Genesis, Adam, the first man, and Eve, the first woman, enjoyed a close relationship with God in the idyllic Garden of Eden, but before long, in response to the enticement of Satan in the guise of an evil serpent, they chose to contravene the one restriction that God had given them. After their sin or transgression of God's law, Adam and Eve's relationship with God was fractured. Their interaction with creation changed. They could no longer live in the garden where they had been placed, and their relationship with one another was marred. Out of Eden. Adam and Eve's family grew after leaving Eden, but sin continued to blight their lives. Cain, the oldest son of Adam and Eve, killed his brother Abel. Although there were positive developments such as music and metalwork, God lost patience with human beings because of their wickedness and violence. Despite grieving over his creation, God decided to wipe out humanity by means of a flood, but he spared one family on whom the future of the world would depend. Noah, chosen because he was a righteous man, obeyed God's command to build an ark or boat in the desert. Here he preserved his family